well as recorded via the internet, and that this recording is being archived for future viewing. So can I ask that all participants please mute themselves when not speaking in order to avoid any background noise or feedback, in particular when other participants are speaking. If a participant wishes to speak, can they please put their hand up if they can be seen on the screen, or use the raise hand function. Please ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function for the sake of the recording and a fair reflection of the minutes. The chat function may be used to highlight any technical issues to the chairman, myself, or to Mark as Democratic Services Officer. So if any participant has difficulty hearing or being heard or seen when they are addressing the committee, then if you can let me or you could let Mark know. Okay. That's the first bit done. So shall we move on to the agenda, which hopefully you'll have all had sight of? And the first part one, apologies for absence, please. Are there any?
Okay, Chair, we've had a couple. We've had obviously from the Chair, Councillor Collins, Councillor Perks, and also from Mr. Dutch, Mrs. Doyle, the tenant representatives. I don't know if members have also got any apologies at all from their groups. I think, yeah, those are that's everything in terms of apologies, Chair.
Okay, apologies earlier. I announced Councillor Collins as Councillor Millie, so I hope she didn't mind the familiarity in her absence. So shall we take part 2 minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of October before the main items of the agenda? Obviously, you'll have had a chance to have a look at these minutes, and can I ask if you agree them as an accurate and fair reflection of the meeting from the 5th of October?
Happy to move them, Chair.
Happy to second, Chair.
Thank you, everyone. And now to take any declarations of interest, including any whipping declarations. I don't believe we've received any, Mark.
No, I haven't had anything prior to the meeting, Chair. I don't know if members have anything now they want to declare or not.
Nope.
No, Chair. I don't think so.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. So as briefly discussed earlier, we are going to take Kirsty Davis and a report that she has first, if we're all in agreement. I understand that Kirsty sort of has an additional report that I think has been asked to bring forward to item number 1 under references.
Yeah, that's the Youth Offending Service report, Chair.
Okay, the Youth Offending Service. So if I can hand over to Kirsty. Kirsty, over to you.
Good evening, everybody. I just wanted to introduce myself. I say I'm new to the Vale, but I'm not so new anymore. I've been in since January, but I have taken over the service manager position in respect of Paula Barnett, who obviously retired after many, many, many years of really positive service in terms of managing and leading the youth offending service in the Vale. So this is my first report to the Scrutiny Committee since I've taken up the post. So the purpose of the report is really to provide you of an update in terms of the last 12-month performance between the period of April 21 and March 22. There's quite a lot of performance data within the report, which I'm sure you've all had sight of. My intention is to kind of give some of the highlights in relation to this. I'm hoping to try and keep it as interesting as possible where there's quite a lot of data. So please bear with me. I'm happy to answer any questions at all in relation to any of the areas. But really this is enabling you to have effective oversight of the performance of the Youth Offending Service. So if you're happy, I'll start going through the report. So as part of the grant funding terms and conditions, the Youth Offending Service is required by the Youth Justice Board to undertake performance reporting in relation to a number of key performance indicators. So we have to report on the national indicators, which relates to the reduction in first-time entrants, reduction in reoffending, and reduction in the use of custody. We also have devolved Welsh indicators, which is engagement with education, training and employment, access to suitable accommodation, and access to substance misuse services. So we've also agreed some local performance indicators with the Youth Offender Service Management Board to give you a clearer picture of performance, really. And these are reoffending by young people in the youth justice system, reoffending by young people starting a diversion intervention, and the number of victims participated in direct restorative justice. So the performance reported by the Youth Offending Service is always approximately 1 quarter behind, and that's because of the need to the Youth Justice Board to validate the data before circulation. So if you note that the data appears a little historic, that's the nature of the reporting in terms of the expectations with the Youth Justice Board. So to start going through in relation to the first performance indicator, I'm start discussing the national indicators. So in relation to the performance data for the first time entrance to youth justice system over the period of 12 months, this reflects a significant 44.5% decrease, which is a positive highlight. The first time entrants are classed in any child or young person who receives a youth additional caution or above. So the first time reduction in the use of first time entrance is a really positive and good indicator, because it will highlight the focus of our preventative and diversionary services in terms of providing opportunities to divert children from coming into the system at the initial point. So the figure is based on per 100,000 young people, and the decrease relates to 8 children. And what I would note in relation to these is they're relatively small cohorts in relation to children. So that must be taken into account. But the decrease is one of the positive highlights that I wanted to draw your attention to. So if we look at our performance against other areas across South Wales, our rate is quite significant. If we look at 11.6 reduction in relation to first time entrants across Wales, and 8.6% across the YJS family. The report highlights the yacht family. These are areas such as Solihull, North Somerset, Lancashire, and these are areas that the Youth Justice Board deem as roughly equivalent of in terms of size and local issues. So the yacht family is something which is utilised as the performance measure for all youth offending services. So obviously in relation to that, we're also performing really positively. So in terms of the performance, so again, in terms of emphasising the performance of preventative and out-of-court diversionary interventions have fluctuated in relation to the number of young people that we include within that. But again, we've had a period of decrease, and this is a consistent downward pattern in relation to decrease of children entering the system. And again, just to emphasise really that I think that is about the flexibility of our interventions for out-of-court and for the robust strengths-based preventative offer. So in terms of the reduction in reoffending, which is the next performance measure, there's 2 measures on which we have to provide data. That's the binary rate, which is where a child or young person in the cohort has reoffended in the 12-month period, and also the reoffences, which is the number of offences which that young person or child may have reoffended within the tracked 12-month period. So at our reporting point, again, we're indicating positive figure of 29.5 compared to the national figure of 32.6% and the Wales figure of 37%. So again, in relation to that, our number of children who are reoffending within the cohort is lower than our Welsh counterparts and than the average. So we're still evidencing a positive impact there. In terms of the reoffensive, the number of offences, in terms of those who are reoffending, we've had a decrease again in relation to that, so from 41.2% to 29.5%. But I do have to note in relation to that, there is a change in the size of the cohort, if that's the number of children who would be fit in within this category, youth justice performance was kind of further out of date in terms of that reoffending cohort, because we have to map that cohort, and then so that works out at approximately 18 months. So the frequency rate, which is in relation to children, is there's a slight increase from 2% to 2.3, but again that relates to the number of children in the cohort. So we're still below the reporting period, so 29.50 compared to the national figure, to remind you, 32% and 37.4%. So in terms of moving on to our local performance information, we can see, as this is the additional element that we provided, we can see that utilising this data, we are able to use a cohort of children and young people, and these are the cohort which we will map this data. So within our current live tracking cohort, there are 21 children, and these are children who started an order, either out of court disposal, court or community or prevention, between the 1st of January and the 31st of March. This will indicate that 6 out of the 21 young people have reoffended in the 12 months, and they've committed a total of 10 offences. And again, if we look at the information around this, what we would see with young children, young people, we would see that there's a continuing decline of the numbers entering the system. However, that children who are in the system remain really complex, their needs are complex, and there's a huge degree of well-being and welfare concerns in relation to these children as well. And we're noting in relation to the first-time entrants that we're working with children from a very early point, and again, their needs are also very high, and there's complex needs within the system. So in relation to our custody figure, again, we have a positive outcome in that we've had no children who've been subject to a custodial sentence during this period. Again, we work hard to provide alternatives because that promotes the best outcome for children, and we know that statistically the impact of children who are sentenced to custody, the reoffending rates are much higher than within community disposals. In respect of moving on to the local indicator of education, training and employment, this relates to the number of hours that a child is in education, both pre and post 16, and enables stakeholders to identify what the underlying factors are. Is there a lack of suitable provision? Are there attendance issues or other wellbeing concerns which need to be addressed? So data provided within this period between April 21 to March 22 would say that children and young people of statutory school age were offered an average of 12.5 hours at the start of their intervention, 25 hours at review stage, and ended on an average of 12.5%. So the average hours was less at 7.8% at the end. So this relates to low numbers of children in the cohort, but also it doesn't necessarily reflect the amount of work that goes in from the education department and from ourselves in terms of trying to support and maintain children within appropriate educational provision. But in relation to that area, we're below the hours offered and attended in terms of the education department. But this is, as I say, small numbers of young people. It relates to 2 young people who ended that statutory intervention within that cohort. So the figures are reflective of a small number of children. Again, in terms of those who are above school age, The requirement is that they have a recommended 16 hours provision at the start, with those attending at 12.4, at review 6.9, but at the end 10.3. So there is evidence that children and young people are accessing training courses and being supported by Careers Wales and Inspire to Work. So the figure is again small cohorts, but again is slightly more positive. So in terms of the access to suitable accommodation, which is our other local indicator, which is endorsed within the Welsh Youth Justice Board criteria, we have 11 young people in suitable accommodation at the start during the period, and 1 young person was in what was deemed unsuitable accommodation, which was to include hostel and bedsit accommodation. So that young person was staying with friends during this period. He'd moved several times and was left feeling really unsettled due to those changes. But by the review point and the end of the intervention, that child was feeling more settled, and there was support provided from the Children and Young People Services and the YOS during this time. The next criteria that I need to update you on is in respect of the substance misuse treatment. Again, within this, we had 9 children identified as requiring assessment, 3 were already accessing services, 6 young people were referred and 2 were assessed within 5 working days. Without this then, 2 young people were assessed as requiring a Tier 2 service, 2 required a T3 service, and there were no required young people who were needing to access a Tier 4 service. So what I would comment in relation to the substance misuse performance indicators, we have had some barriers within youth offending service in relation to this. There was a change in commissioning arrangements. So the new provider is the Cardiff and Vale Drug and Alcohol Service, CAVDAS, which is an alliance. And this is which was commissioned by the Cardiff and Vale Area Planning Board after a significant period of a number of organisations going out to tender. They will now have the contract for delivering specialist support to and interventions across youth justice. So this transition has affected staffing because the Youth Offending Service has a specialist substance misuse worker seconded in, but unfortunately for a period of 6 months we've not had anybody within that post, but on a positive note, interviews were conducted at the beginning of 24th of August, and they have successfully recruited. We're awaiting a start date, but we're very pleased that we have got a staff member who will be starting in that post, so that we filled that gap. So in relation to the mental health services, the measure identifies if children are appropriately screened within 28 working days of the referral, and within the performance data, 4 children were identified as by screening as required mental health assessment, 3 children were already in receipt of mental health services, and 1 child and young person was referred. They were assessed as requiring T3 treatment, which was received within 28 days of assessment. I do apologise if you can hear that in the background. That is my dog who's decided to make some noise. That isn't me whining, I can promise you. So in relation to the final measure, which we are going to talk through, it's the access to restorative justice. And this is a local performance indicator. So within this period, there were 77 interventions which closed, and 88 identified victims. So 80 victims were offered direct and indirect restorative justice. There was an attempt to contact the other 8 victims by phone and letter, but we didn't receive any response from the victims. So no victims out of this cohort wanted to access direct restorative justice, but although 18 victims did receive indirect restorative justice. 1 victim responded to the victim engagement and confirmed they were satisfied with the process. So Engagement in restorative justice is voluntary on both the part of the victim and the child and young person, and we have noted since the pandemic that the opportunity for the child and young person to meet and the victim has face-to-face has reduced drastically. This has impacted on how willing victims are to engage in direct restorative processes and victim confidence in relation to this area. This is a key area which we're going to be focusing on, and this is an area which performance indicator is due to be revised on a national, and we've set ourselves target on a local level to try and do all that we can to engage victims and meet their needs. So finally, during the this year, the Youth Offending Service had a full inspection, which was the first inspection that it had in a number of years, I believe 14 years. So we had a full inspection in April 2022. A copy of the report, the full inspection report, can be found in relation to the web address that I've included within the report. There was very positive progress noted, and we came out as good overall in relation to the service that we provide. We have to produce an action plan for areas of recommendations. All our areas for recommendations included within the action plan. 3 of those areas related to policies and processes that have been developed that remain in draft since I came into post, so that we've made good progress in relation to that. But overall, the inspectorate found that we had the right ingredients for success and found that there was very strong partnership work, very strong work in relation to children and young people, the values and ethos. So overall, we were really pleased in relation to that. So in terms of the wider aspects, I don't intend to go through how we evidence the 5 ways of working. What I would note in relation to climate change and nature implications, that the work of the YOS does primarily undertake work within our strong reparative offer. And our reparation officer is skilled at engaging children and is creative in his approach, particularly around the environment. He will do sessions on environmental awareness issues, and he links them in with beach clean reparation sessions, graffiti removal. So there is a very strong element in terms of our environment, protecting it, and also increasing young people's awareness in relation to that. We've had some very positive representation which have been in the local press about clearing up areas and supporting communities, for example, in St Athens, and very positive feedback in relation to the work that children undertook in that area to try and improve that and clear an area in St Athens. So that's it in terms of me going through the report. Just happy to answer any questions that any of you may have, and thank you for bearing with me, and I do apologise again if you heard any whining from my dog in the background.
Okay, thank you so much, Kirsty, and you're fine. I think there's a number of us here tonight who have pets, so I'll make that declaration. I have a spaniel in the background too. I'm going to open up the sort of floor, as it were, to see if anyone would like to ask any questions at this stage to Kirsty, but to thank her again for her comprehensive sort of explanation. I have Councillor Hanks with her hand up. Would you like to ask the question, please?
Thank you, Chair. Evening, Kirsty. Thank you for your presentation. I was just wondering, I had 3 questions really. Performance reflects a substantial decrease in the first time of entrance in the Vale and elsewhere. Do we know why that is? Is that down to the pandemic, or why? Because there is quite a substantial decrease, isn't there? Which is good and positive news.
Yeah. So I would say that there may be an impact in terms of the pandemic, but I feel it's more positively represented by the strength of the preventative offer and the diversionary work that we undertake within the service in the Vale. That's a very strong area of practice, and we are seeking to increase any opportunity for targeted prevention work. So actually within the pandemic, there were an increase in, as some of you may be aware, incidents of what is perceived to be antisocial behaviour. So I would say that children were coming to the attention in areas which they could come through the system. But there has been a lot of positive work, and I'd attribute that to the really hard work and the positive results of the team really in relation to the decrease in first time entrants.
Excellent, that's really good news, and really good for you as well to get that feedback. So well done. I was going to say as well, during the period April 21 to March 22, no youths were subjected to a custodial sentence. Was this anything to do with the backlog of cases that go to court, or again, is it all the good work that you put in? And what is the situation like today with the courts? Is there a backlog and a long waiting list? Because there were quite a long time some months ago, but it might be better.
So there is still a backlog in relation to offences going to court, but I would indicate that there is a backlog in relation to the matters under investigation. So what we find is that a young person may be arrested for quite serious offences sometimes, and they're under investigation from the police. They may be arrested, may be taken in for interview. There's a limitations now due to changes within the legislation about the amount of time children can spend on bail, quite rightly, in relation to being in the police station. So what we currently have is young people will be arrested on an offence. They will then be able to leave the police station without being bailed, and the matter will be under investigation. And during that time, that can be quite a lengthy period. So there is some delay with the court, but what we're noticing is there's a delay more earlier on in the system rather than it necessarily being at the court itself. So again, in relation to the figures of custody, we have had young people during this period who have been given an all options pre-sentence report, which is where we are required to address the possibility of custody. And what we have undertaken is put a robust approach in offering a strong community sentence, and in that respect the court has followed those recommendations. So I would consider that again probably down to, no, I won't say probably, I'm going to say down to the hard work of the team again, but I would note that there are a lot of matters under investigation, and again we'll be coming through over time in relation to the police, but we will continue to work very hard to look at all alternatives with our partners, with Children and Young People Services, and with a very strong partnership approach which was highlighted within the inspection report, to offer alternatives. In relation to the custody rates, we were not inspected fully on resettlement because we don't have children in custody, but what did come out of the inspection report is that they were very, very satisfied with our arrangement, that if we did have a child sentenced to custody, that we would be able to mobilise a really effective response, and so we received very positive feedback, although we didn't have an actual score because we didn't have children in custody, which is extremely positive in its own right, and that was noted by the inspectors.
Lovely, thank you. And my final question, it seemed funny that only one victim responded to the victim questionnaire out of 80. I just wondered what that was, you know, do you have an answer for that, please?
I think across all areas in Wales, victim engagement can be notoriously difficult. I think it has been impacted by the pandemic, but what we're doing in relation to that is we're really looking about how we can improve that, making sure that our initial response, we send out a letter, we're following up with phone calls. We have to bear in mind that not disturbing victims, but at the same time being a little bit consistent, but really maximising any opportunity. So I would say that figure is an area that we're really focusing on, and we've already done a lot of work in that. We will continue to expand upon that. We have during this period of time we've got 2 victim officers and we had a period where we had only one in place due to recruitment. We've successfully appointed another victim officer who's very, very strong. He's an ex-police representative, and so been really proactive. So that figure, although not something which we want, is quite reflective of what other areas have experienced, and it is about the difficulties in engaging with victims when it's purely voluntary in the first place, but also the pandemic hasn't helped in terms of really kind of trying to maximise the opportunity for engagement, but it's not something that we're happy with, and it's something that is a key area of us that we want to try and focus on the learning from other areas as well.
Lovely. Thank you, Kirsty. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I now have Councillor Carroll.
Sorry, Councillor, on mute.
Apologies. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Kirsty, for the report, and a belated welcome to the authority as well. It's just a question in relation to the inspection.
Yeah.
Just did I mishear when I said that it had been 14 years since the last inspection was carried out?
The last full inspection in relation to that. So there's been some thematic inspections in the Vale, but yes, it had been a very long period, and that was down to the determination of it by the inspectors, so that you have the inspection framework. I think because locally there had been a lot in Wales where colleagues I've had a lot of areas which needed to be re-inspected. Yeah, so it had been a period. However, during this time, there have been some thematic inspections, and our performance data is scrutinised, has to go to the Youth Justice Board quarterly. So there's still a very high degree of oversight, but in terms of a full inspection framework.
So do these just happen ad hoc then? There's no sort of statutory timescale on it? It seems I mean, don't get me wrong, you're working to government here, so it's nothing internal, but I'm just a bit curious to see why it's 14 years. I mean, a school inspection would happen once every 4 years or so. It just seems.
So I would say that usually you're looking at about every 4 years. It is unusual a length of time. But there's a number of reasons, including COVID in relation to it and the impact on inspection frameworks. So that would be internal down to the inspectorate, but that is a long period of time. Usually you're looking at approximately every 4 years. They don't have a definite that it has to happen during that period, but they do have a very clear list of which areas will be subject next within the inspection framework.
So do you have any clue as to when the next inspection will happen then? Judge, well, I'm just thinking that if it's been 14 years, I mean, I get COVID, but that's only 2 years out of the 14. It just seems.
I'm working towards 4 years. That's how we always work, and we are very clear about wanting to try and reach, which they've told us would be very possible, or very probable, an outstanding service. So for me, I came in having had a number of inspections in other areas, very much for the inspection focus and best practice focus, because obviously it isn't just about past inspections, it's about children and young people, which is the primary function. But for me, we would be working very much on the framework that we would be inspection ready, and that we are trying to promote the best possible practice at all times, whether we have an inspection or not, because we have a lot of internal measures of scrutiny that we will continue to have. I think, sorry, Rachel.
Yeah, I was going to say, Kirsty, if you don't mind, and Councillor Carroll, if I can bring in Rachel into this part of the discussion. Yes, Rachel, I assume you'd like to make a comment on what's just been discussed.
Yeah, hi colleagues. So for those who don't know me, I'm Rachel Evans, Head of Children's Services in the Vale. Apologies for being slightly late. Kirsty, well done. Just to, I think it's important to note that inspection is different in the Youth Offending Service. So because they have tiers, grades of inspection, and I would hate 14 years to be something that you focused on in quite the way that the conversation is going, because that suggests that we haven't been overseen, that there's been no consideration of what this Youth Offending Service is doing, and that's quite the contrary. So a school inspection will be a school inspection, yes, an inspection of children's services will be an inspection of children's services. In the world of youth offending, they have different types of inspections, different grades, different levels of involvement from agencies. So it isn't 14 years since the Youth Offending Service has been reviewed, inspected. It's Kirsty's talking about the full, the multi-layered inspection. So, Councillor Carroll, I just wouldn't want you to think that 14 years, because I mean I haven't been a head of service 14 years, and we've been inspected in my time. So thank you.
Yeah, and if I could just ask one further point on this, Chair, if that's
absolutely fine. Yeah.
Obviously, given that this report I think came out in August, it would be a little unfair to ask on progress regarding to the recommendations. I was just keen to know when we would have an update come to the committee so that we can then review and scrutinise the progress as and when it happens.
Yeah, so I will look at when we can get that out. So we do have an inspection action plan, which was required to be submitted in August. I can give you a verbal update in relation to each of the areas. So what we have done is we've done work internally and with board members. We have identified a group of staff members, a board representative who will lead on that particular area and each of the main recommendations, and this will be obviously a senior leader from multi-agency, and just to clarify in relation to that the full inspection is of all the partnership agencies within that as well. And so I do apologise for any confusion, but it is the full one of all the partner agencies, the police, health, education, so they would also be inspected as part of that full inspection. We have a process in place where we've already started work in relation to the actions and completed a number of actions. We have a mechanism in place now for the board member to lead that with a manager in the youth offending service and with colleagues and staff members, because it's really important that the board is relatable to the team and the team relates directly to the board as well, which is about one of the recommendations. So we've got meetings set up to review them, each of the areas. I've completed a provisional plan of areas, and a number of our recommendations were in relation to, if I can give you one example, adopt appropriate policy on disproportionality within the next 12 months. Prior to the inspection, we worked incredibly hard to pull draft policies and processes together. So the work is in progress in relation to each of the areas we're required to implement. There's a draft in place, and we're undertaking further development work in relation to that. So I would wish to kind of reassure you that actually a lot of work has already been undertaken in relation to that, and our rating in the inspection and the recommendations which we were given reflect that work was ongoing. It's really positive that there are no surprises for us, that we've given a very, very honest appraisal of where we felt that our progress was very, very strong in areas that we identified we want to continue to develop, and that indicator was reinforced by inspectors, and they felt extremely confident that we've got all the right ingredients to be able to move towards the highest rating of an outstanding service, which is our intention and our plan for the next inspection.
Okay, thank you.
I don't see anyone else asking any questions, so if possible, may I ask a question, Kirsty? And that is in terms of, I'm newly elected this year, so bear with me if this has already been answered previously. But in terms of the report that was undertaken, and you've already alluded to a gap in resources in filling a position, did the report highlight any perceived pressures on staffing as a resource, as a possible sort of factor, or is that something that's already been taken into consideration in terms of the action plan, the inspection plan that you've put into place?
So the inspectorate commented that we have appropriate resources within the partnership to be able to continue to demonstrate very strong performance. Obviously, the gaps that we've had have been due to recruitment issues rather than a resource issue per se, but know that they obviously within financial climates we need to do as much as we can possibly in terms of the budget that we actually have, but know that there was an indication that the resources that we have and the partnership contributions and the partnership relationships are certainly deemed to be appropriate to enable us to continue to provide a basis for the best possible service for children and young people in the Vale and for the community.
Thank you, Kirsty. Thank you. I can't see anyone else wanting to ask a question of you, Kirsty or Rachel. So if Mark, if it's appropriate, if I move to the recommendation to the committee?
Yeah, that's fine, Chair.
Okay, so the recommendation for the committee this evening is that Scrutiny Committee for Homes and Safer Communities considers the content of the performance report. Can I have someone to agree and second?
I'll second it.
Happy to second it, yes.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And thanks again to Kirsty and Rachel. Okay, so we move on now to the next agenda item.
Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Okay, you can leave if you don't have to stay. Okay, so if I'm right, Mark, the next agenda item is in relation to agenda item 4, the draft capital strategy 2023 to 24 and the initial capital programme proposals 2023 to 24 up to the years 2027 to 28. And this stems from a report at Cabinet that took place on the 6th of October.
That's correct, Chair. And we've got Gemma from the finance team to present the report tonight.
We've got Gemma Jones and
Just
Gem.
Hi.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Over to
Hi,
you,
good
Gemma.
evening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So this report is very much starting off the capital budget setting process and is based on the indicative settlement that we had from Welsh Government as part of the 22-23 budget, which set out 200 million across Wales in 23-24 and 24-25, but 20 million of that funding in each year being ring-fenced for decarbonisation. So the strategy plans for the use of the Vale of Glamorgan's projected share of that 180 million, as it's not yet clear on what basis that £20 million decarbonisation funding will be allocated. It doesn't make specific allocations in terms of bids, but it does set out those bids that have been submitted as part of the capital programme and will set out some of the pressures. So it can be clear that the bids obviously add up to a higher figure than the available funding, and so there's going to need to be some prioritisation that takes place over the coming months. And of course, that was only an indicative figure, and it's likely that those figures will need to be revised in the coming month. We expect to have a settlement from Welsh Government in late December. So this budget also reflects the updates that have taken place in the 5-year capital programme, starting in 23-24 during the current year. So reflected at the time of the report, 107.4 million gross spend with 47 million unsupported borrowing, which was 5.281 million for the general fund, and the significant proportion of that unsupported borrowing, 41.8 million for the housing revenue account. Within that as well, we also have supported borrowing as part of our Welsh Government allocation, and that totaled just over £4 million. The additional bids and funding was set out in paragraph 2.24 of the report onwards. The bids were 14.6 million net of specific grant and section 106, and the bids are detailed in appendix 3 of the report. There are obviously some key pressures within the capital arena at the moment. We've recently received the results of our condition surveys for properties, and that highlights the funding gap in the region of 38 million. We also need to decarbonise our estate with a target of net zero emissions by 2030. As you'll be used to me talking about when we bring the monitoring report, we have significant inflationary pressures. So a recent survey set out a number of unquantified and unresolved inflationary pressures that need to be addressed, and some of those pressures were then submitted as part of capital bids. The need to continue to invest in schools and community learning, the need to continue to implement the waste strategy, flood risk and other coastal issues, our ongoing commitment to the city deal and strategic projects. And also in the current economic context, we have increasing interest rates, which make it increasingly expensive to borrow to fund schemes in the capital programme. So as I mentioned, the bids are detailed in appendix 3 of this report, and I do apologise. Looking at this appendix, the text is very, very small. Now, the key bids that I was drawing out as specific to this committee were in relation to, there's a bid for programme of replacement and maintenance on alley gates, which have been in place for a number of years in the Vale, originally funded by a grant scheme, I believe, and also a bid in relation to the Empty Homes grant scheme, which was a scheme that Welsh Government were proposing to roll out to try and rectify some of the issues they're seeing with long-standing empty homes, to all local authorities in Wales, and the council are being asked to consider finding a 35% match funding contribution. In terms of the process, so obviously the report was taken to Cabinet in October. We are now bringing the detail of that report to Scrutiny for consultation. There are also service-specific budget working groups that are scheduled in for the end of November. We expect to have the settlement, as we say, towards the end of December. We'll also be waiting for the additional detail from the Chancellor in next week, with a view to coming back with a provisional budget in January 2023, making those final proposals to Cabinet in February 2023, and then reporting the final proposals to Council for the 6th of March with a view to meeting that statutory deadline for setting council tax. So quite a high level review of the report, but happy to pick up any questions on the content.
Okay, thank you, Gemma, and I take on board your comment. The text, the font was really small. But
I apologise.
Yeah. No. I see there's a lot of information. I don't currently see any hands raised. Oh, I do now. Councillor Morgan, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, it's just something that comes up in the midst of this report, which does, of course, cover a huge amount of detail and income and expenditure. But I'm just curious, reference to the Highways Asset Management Plan, which is given a paragraph. I'm just curious, is this something that's going to come back for us to look at in scrutiny, and how a Highways Asset Management Plan is going to be developed? It might not be something that you can answer now, but just a general question. How do we as Scrutiny get involved in developing the Highways Asset Management Plan?
Well, I can give a very brief response on that, but I'm happy to, feed in some more detail. So the Highways Asset Management Plan is obviously important for us to make sure that we're planning our kind of limited capital funding for resurfacing the highways, etc. Now, I believe that an update is required in this area, but I am not sure on the current status of that work. But I'm happy to take away that question and feedback a response.
Councillor Morgan, are you happy with that?
I am. My particular interest in this is the question I've raised before in other meetings about the maintenance and safety of rural roads, which often seem to be left out of this consideration. So it's not simply resurfacing, it's signage, clearance of drains, and making the lanes safer, because there are a lot of incidents out here at the moment, and just want to know that is being looked at as a headline rather than something that's buried in the detail anywhere. Okay,
thank you, Councillor Morgan, and I believe that Gemma will take that query away and obviously feed back to us in the appropriate mechanism. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Any other colleagues, any other councillors wishing to ask a question at this point? I know there was a considerable amount of information to absorb. And no doubt that, as you've said, Gemma, there'll be an update coming back to us in January.
There will be, and in previous years, and I hope this will be, the case again that we tend to do members briefing sessions in kind of January, February time as well, to provide a bit more detail around the budget as well. And of course the budget will need to go out to public consultation as well. And last year we did include the kind of capital element as well in that consultation. So yeah, a number of things happening in the coming months, but I think it's really key that we get that settlement information, so we know how much funding that we're prioritising.
Okay, thank you, Gemma. Mark, I'll take some guidance from you in relation to sort of the report going forward, because I understand it was a document with a lot of information for us to consider. And as Gemma said, there's going to be some briefings for colleagues for elected members in January. Do we have anything to recommend at this point?
Right, Chair. Obviously, the key recommendation in the report was around any sort of recommendations or comments going back to corporate performance as the lead scrutiny committee, and then obviously that would be forwarded on to Cabinet. So I just wonder if committee had any comments or recommendations, or they were simply happy to just note this report at this time, subject to obviously further reports or consultations coming back. I don't know if members have comments or simply happy to note.
From my perspective, Mark, I could see that I'm happy to note it at this point, because there's obviously going to be an ongoing discussion, and it'll be important to sort of keep a sort of questioning and scrutinising the document. So I'm happy for it to be noted at this point.
I'll second that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hanks. Thank you very much. I understand you're still with us, Gemma, for the next section. So the next section is item financial strategy 23-24, and the curiously titled medium-term financial plan refresh. So again, I believe it's over to you, Gemma.
Yes, it is. Thank you very much. So absolutely taking our kind of previous medium-term financial plan, but seeking to update it in the light of the changing economic position, and aligning it to the new administration, but also seeking to extend it and make it a bit more medium-term. So we've also noted some significant cost pressures emerging from services, but as you'll be aware, we've also got some very significant energy and pay pressures that are reflecting us across the council, as well as some contract-specific pressures. So when we had the settlement for 22-23, we did have some indicative aggregate external finance increases that were given to us, so 3.5% for 23-24 and 2.4% for 24-25. So that was the starting place for our medium-term financial plan. We have had an indication from Welsh Government that it's very unlikely that we will get an improved settlement for 23-24, and we have considered that it's likely the settlement will be less than that 3.5%. And as part of our modelling, looking at scenarios in the report, we did look at a scenario where we received a -1% settlement. We're not expecting to get any further specific detail on the settlement until late December. The report assumes council tax of 3.9%. This is only for planning purposes. It's in line with the assumptions that were made as part of the final budget proposals for 22-23 when we looked forward, and obviously that will need to be further discussion and a policy decision later on in the process. So I think the key headline of the report is there's a significant funding gap that we're reporting in 23-24, but also extending across the medium term. So we're seeing a number of significant cost pressures coming out as services in respect of the inflationary pressures relating to provider fees, for instance, an increasing need for additional learning needs in education. We've got a significant cost pressure that's very relevant to this committee around homelessness. But we're also seeing pressures around our contractual commitments. So, for instance, the waste contract and some statutory requirements as well. So the gap of 23-24 is forecast to be 28 million. There are significant forecast cost pressures of 38 million, and we're only predicting funding of 9.9 million, assuming we were to get that 3.5% AEF and 3.9% council tax. The key driver of those cost pressures is inflation, so 22 million. So we have significant costs associated with pay awards, because it's not just the pay awards that we're projecting for 23-24, it's also correcting the 22-23 budget, because there is a significant gap between the pay awards that we assumed when setting the budget and where we ended up in terms of that the agreed £1,925. We've also got, and I should say 5% for teachers. We've also got significant cost pressures in relation to energy costs, as you would expect, and care and transport costs. And we've also, for a number of years, reported demographic cost pressures. So in particular, from a growing number of pupils with additional learning needs, and also from an ageing population. So some of the things we hope to do as part of the medium-term financial plan and budget strategy was to ensure that we deliver the corporate plan and any emerging trends from the annual assessment, ensure that we have a robust and sustainable financial plan over a 5-year horizon, and making sure that we have as few as possible unallocated savings, and that all our cost pressures were fully recognised. It's important that where we hold reserves, that they're at an appropriate level and they are in the right place, aligned to the key risks of the organisation, that we seek to maximise council tax as much as possible, that our fees and charges cover costs, that it reflects the collective responsibility we have as an organisation to ensure that those finances are robust and sustainable, and that they're accessible and transparent. And then we're also hoping to deliver value for money by making sure that we comply with our financial and contract procedure rules and benchmark best practice across the sector. So in terms of committee specific cost pressures, and this is a particular area where we're hoping that Scrutiny will feed back any comments to corporate performance and resources to feed into that budget process. In terms of the cost of bed and breakfast, homeless accommodation is a significant cost pressure that's relevant to this committee. As you'll know, we've had funding from Welsh Government for a number of years. However, what we're seeing is that funding is dropping out, and we have a significant number of people that we need to accommodate in order to maintain that strategy. So that funding is significant, that's required there. We've also got the impact of the Ukraine refugee crisis. So the current support team consists of 2 team leaders and 5 support staff. But we don't have funding beyond 22-23, although there will clearly be a need beyond that period. Another cost pressure is for private rented coordinator support and support for the new temporary accommodation property. So as you'll be aware, the private rented sector is being relied on quite heavily, and we need to coordinate that more going forward, and also we need to provide additional support for up to 13 units of temporary accommodation at a site in Barry. CCTV, now this has been a cost pressure in previous years, and we have upgraded the cameras and infrastructure for CCTV, and this is a cost pressure for the kind of ongoing monitoring costs of that infrastructure. And there is a cost pressure for community cohesion to help support the community safety workload, and that can be aligned with some of the cost of living implications, the Ukrainian programme, and other programmes that will be impacting community cohesion in the Vale. So we're currently benefiting from 1-year grant funding available for that provision, but it's expected that that need will extend. And there's also a cost pressure for asylum dispersal coordinator. So in June 2022, the dispersal areas for asylum seekers were expanded to include all local authorities in Wales. And it was felt important that a coordinator may be needed to ensure oversight of the issue. In terms of the next steps, very similar to the steps I set out in the capital strategy. Obviously, we're waiting for more detail from the UK government to give us an idea of the likely impact on the Welsh government settlement, expecting a settlement in late November. Directors are currently working to review cost pressures and deliver initial savings proposals based on the shortfalls that we saw in the budget report that equate to approximately 10% of the council's base budget. We would be looking to bring some indicative budget proposals in January 2023 with a review to then bringing the draft budget back in February and agreeing the final budget proposals in council in early March to meet that 11th of March statutory deadline. So again, quite a quick run through the report, but happy to take any questions on the detail.
Okay, thank you, Gemma. And I appreciate again, it's quite a comprehensive report. Are there any questions for Gemma at this stage? No. Are we happy then at this point to move to recommendation? Okay, so Mark, if keep me straight on this one, I have a recommendation that the report and appendices be referred to all the council's scrutiny committees and for committees to review this financial strategy and the assumptions made on costs and funding in the medium-term financial plan refresh, and for any comments from this scrutiny committee to be referred back to Cabinet for consideration.
Yeah, there's a slight amendment to that, Chair. It should be in the first instance referred back to corporate performance resources, similarly to the previous reference we had for them to consider, and then if necessary forward on to Cabinet. So as with the last one, it's really obviously up to the committee if they have any comments or recommendations they want to feed back through in the first instance corporate performance, and then ultimately on to Cabinet if required.
Okay, can I just ask for a point of clarification? And Gemma, I note you said that there's going to be, you'll be coming back to us, and I assume that that's in January again.
Well, I think the current proposal is that the draft proposals come back in January, but because of the time constraints, I think the current proposal is that will go to corporate performance and resources and then straight to Cabinet in January. So I think there would be briefings offered to members as part of that consultation process in January. So I think that's the current expected route.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. No, that makes sense. Thanks very much. So in terms of Mark's point of clarification, are we okay to just sort of agree to that recommendation? Yep.
Sorry, Chair, just to say, obviously, if there are any comments or recommendations that members want to make, or the committee as a whole, they will get forward to the corporate performance resources. If there isn't anything at this time, then it would be simply sort of noting the report, really. So it's obviously up to committee if they want to forward anything to corporate performance resources in terms of any comments or recommendations, or if not, then we would obviously you would have to simply note it at this time.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Is everyone in agreement with that recommendation to note? Yep. Okay.
Yes, Chair. Yeah. Happy to.
Thank you. Thank you. So if we can move on now to the section of reports of the Director of Environment and Housing. This is capital monitoring for the period the 1st of April to the 30th of September 2022. And I believe that we have Laura and Gemma.
Oh, it's me again. Sorry, Chair.
Oh, Jem.
Sorry. Last one from me.
You've a tough gig tonight. You've a tough gig. So thank you. Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. So I just run through this report at quite a high level. There aren't any specific recommendations that relate to this committee, but it does give you an overview of where we are in the capital programme. This is the capital programme as at the 30th of September. The programme we've had some significant amounts of slippage that have gone through so far. So the programme is now standing at 95 million. The capital programme obviously is subject to some significant inflationary pressures due to the current economic climate. We're needing to negotiate with contractors more, re-tendering process and projects being re-engineered, and this is causing some of that slippage. There's also some long issues with lead times in terms of delivery of materials, and also there's a shortage in some areas of specialist skilled labour. The schemes are being closely monitored throughout the year to identify overspends and slippage. And as part of this report, there is slippage of 2.5 million that's being requested. We do anticipate further slippage later in the year, and that will be identified through our regular monthly monitoring process. Appendix 1 to the report details the financial progress of the capital programme, and it's summarised in Appendix 2 over the directorates, which sets out the approved budget and then details the movements in the year, including slippages and additions, to demonstrate the kind of journey of that capital budget through the year. We also detail within the report delegated authority requests and note the use of emergency powers. There aren't any specific amendments that are relevant to the committee, but if there are any questions, I'm happy to take any on the report.
Sorry, I was on mute. Okay, thank you, Gemma. Again, I'm going to open it up to if anyone has any questions at this stage or any comments to make. No? Okay. In that case, then, if I move to Mark, I understand that there is just a recommendation on this in terms of the committee to note the progress that's been made on the 2022-23 capital programme and to note the use of the delegated authority as set out in the report.
Yeah, and obviously we've got recommendations 3 and 4 as well, where committee note the use of emergency powers as detailed in the attached appendix, and then the committee noting a number of changes to the 22-23 and future years capital programme, and there's a number of bullet points outlining those changes. Yeah,
and I assume colleagues have had an opportunity to look at those changes within the document. Yep. I know I've seen them. Okay. If we're happy with that.
Yeah, Chair, it's just that if obviously members are happy to note the recommendations 1 to 4, or if there's any specific or additional recommendations, they can, but if members are happy to note those, it's just a matter of noting those.
Would it be worth what? Yeah, you've obviously read them out, Mark, and is everyone clear about the recommendations and noting? Yes? Good. Okay. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for bearing with me on this one. Okay. Okay, Mark, thank you. Oh, gosh. Now we move on to item 7, which is the Housing Support Programme strategy. I'm not quite sure. Oh, is that over to you, Mike? Thank you for saving me there. So I notice over to you. If you can lead on this for me, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, committee, for considering what is a brand new strategy. You are seeing it for the first time in the council, in that it's come into scrutiny initially before, as you can see in the report, a number of recommendations referring your consideration to Cabinet. The strategy, as I say, is new. It follows on from Welsh Government requirement to develop a single high-level strategic document for both our housing support programme, but also our homeless prevention work. It also conforms with requirements under the Housing Wales Act, Part 2 of the Housing Wales Act 2014, in that each local authority is required to develop a homelessness strategy as part of the legislation. And as you can see from the report before you, it follows a set template the Welsh Government had developed with local authorities, so that there's a consistency of approach across each of the local authority areas. The report itself gives you some background, some of which I've just mentioned, but effectively looks at developing and further developing our homeless prevention approach to homelessness, but also asking us to consider and to develop our approach to rapid rehousing, and generally a feeling that where people do become homeless, it is for a short period of time and it's once only, and that options such as housing related support and options in terms of housing accommodation go hand in glove to give people the best possibility to sustain their tenancies. Moving on to the report itself, as part of the work that we've undertaken, there's been a significant degree of stakeholder involvement, not only with professional partners, both internally and externally to the council, but also some really important work where, as you can see from the strategy itself, that we've engaged with significant numbers of landlords, providers, and more importantly, the individuals who have used or wish to use our services. So the vision for the new housing support programme strategy, as you can see from 2.1, is to end homelessness in the Vale of Morgan and to provide person-centred housing support to enable individuals and families to overcome their housing problems. And as you can see, that's underpinned by a number of core principles which we highlight in the report. Firstly, homelessness is a corporate responsibility. It's not just something for housing to address. There are a whole raft of issues that relate to housing difficulties and challenges that residents face. Some of them may be dependency related, some of them may be issues in relation to their mental health, and health involvement is required. There are a whole range of issues that lead people to come to us looking for assistance with their housing. We also, I think was mentioned in an earlier report around the provision of adequate resources required to reflect the level and importance of homelessness. We also know that our services should appear to be seamless, even if they are provided corporately. For the end user, they need to be seamless in our approach. We need to ensure that we have effective partnership working and communication, and that our decisions and actions are supported and by our service users and providers. Equally important is the evidence base, and as you can see within the report, we highlight within the strategy itself a number of evidence-based needs assessments which have led us to the priorities that we'll talk about in a moment. So what were those key issues in the assessments? What were the highlights? I think we know that there's an imbalance between the numbers of single people who are presenting at the moment and the amount of accommodation that we have to facilitate. It was mentioned earlier around the pressure on bed and breakfast. Up until COVID, we didn't use bed and breakfast as a local authority, but at the last count, we have about 90 single people currently in our 3 hotels that we use for bed and breakfast at the moment. We know that there are challenges with regard to the private rented sector, and again, you will have seen an action in one of the cost pressure reports that you've just heard around increasing the capacity within the team to improve access to the private rented sector. We know, and members will have just been briefed on the new Renting Homes Act, and whilst we have some anecdotal evidence in relation to how the private rented sector is reacting to that new legislation, we are also seeing increasing numbers of Section 21 notices issued to private landlords. And we have over, at the moment, we have over 20 families in temporary accommodation. And again, not something that was previously a significant issue for ourselves. We know during COVID, clearly that there are a lot of people who are struggling currently with mental health and related support needs, anxiety and depression, and that concern being highlighted specifically in the homelessness cohort. And equally, the evidence identifies a gap in terms of some of our high-risk offenders and repeat offenders in terms of the lack of suitable accommodation, whether that's supported or direct access. Women fleeing domestic abuse, again, from the report, you'll see in the assessment there is a mismatch between the number of supported units and the number of clients who highlight domestic abuse as a key factor in terms of their support need. And more interestingly, a relatively new theme that we're starting to see in terms of older people, particularly those over 55s who are finding accommodation challenging and finding their way through to service. And then finally, issues relating to the provision of services at a lower level. I think the point we make here is that the threshold for statutory service intervention is getting higher and higher, partly because of resources and capacity, which obviously leaves the preventative services with a significant number of people who may not be able to access those statutory services. However, we're identifying as having some fairly acute support needs. So based on those identified issues, we've identified a number of actions within the report, or a number of key objectives. There are 8 of those that you can see at 2.4. They're amplified within the strategy itself. I won't go through them all, but as you can see, each of those objectives really respond to the themes that I've just mentioned to you. If I can draw your attention to Appendix 1 of the report, which is the strategy itself. And as you can see, again, I won't take you through the assessments, but you can see some fairly clear and stark messages that have helped form our thinking in terms of this area. And then moving on to the action plan, which supports those primary priority objectives. You can see a number of actions. I think there are about 30 individual actions against each of the 8 priorities. And as you can see from those, they are intended to ensure that we minimise evictions, that homelessness is rare and not repeated, that homelessness is a corporate priority, and that for those that need our support is available. We also recognise that we need to review, if you look at the customer feedback within the body of the strategy, significant numbers of people not knowing about the housing solutions service or not feeling that the outcomes were necessarily meeting their requirements. And I think you can see from one of the priorities a lot of work there around training, around advice and around awareness raising in terms of the services on offer in the council and through its wider partners. Clearly, the one-stop shop in Holton Road is assisting us in trying to bring those issues to light, but clearly some work to do. And I suppose something I meant to mention earlier on in the report, I mentioned earlier about rapid rehousing, a particular focus of Welsh Government, that and obviously some challenges for local authorities in terms of rapid rehousing, because you have to have alternatives for people to move into, particularly when they're homeless or when they're in transitional or temporary accommodation. but we will be bringing a new rapid rehousing strategy to committee this year, which will outline some of the key actions that we'll need to undertake and prioritise in order to do that. I think if you speak to my homelessness officers, they will tell you that they already adopt a rapid rehousing approach. And they do, in fairness, significant numbers of more permanent secure housing is sourced by the team as quickly as we possibly can. But I would wish to just flag and to highlight that there isn't enough accommodation. We have significant numbers waiting for accommodation, and hence obviously our priorities then in terms of our new build programme, but also looking at alternatives to bed and breakfast, which we know are not suitable. I mean, we've got a significant number of people in our bed and breakfast hotels that have been there in nearly a year, and obviously we're extremely concerned, hence some of the cost pressures that have been identified in an earlier report. We're extremely concerned that should the funding come to an end in terms of provision of bed and breakfast, we have very few alternatives, although officers are currently looking at the potential to develop additional move-on accommodation, such as conversion of hotels and looking at opportunities such as guest houses, but also in terms of modular accommodation on a number of sites in the Vale. So that's a sort of fairly quick snapshot of the report. As I mentioned, the report is currently draft. It is the first time it's gone to scrutiny first. Your observations would be really welcome. And as I say, with the recommendation that following your consideration that the report be submitted to Cabinet for adoption. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mike. I can see already that we have a hand up from Councillor Carroll.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mike, for the report. It's a question regarding priority 8, and in particular the action point to purchase commercial properties or former commercial properties. It seems to, in the outcome outputs things in section, seems to focus on temporary accommodation. Are there any plans to look at using that as a potential solution to providing permanent accommodation? Because obviously it would be dependent on finding suitable premises, but I've seen plenty of examples of office space being converted to residential dwellings, for example, but perhaps shops and other empty units. So just wanted to see really how ambitious we were being with that, because I do think there's potential to increase the housing stock through that means.
Absolutely, Councillor Carroll. I've had conversations with Marcus Goldsworthy and colleagues within the Regen team, particularly around vacant office space around our town centres, and the potential not only of conversion of office space itself, but also the spaces above those offices, which would equally lend themselves to more permanent accommodation. We are intending, as part of the LDP review, I know that Marcus and colleagues were looking at a town centre element of as part of the proposals that they're looking at. And of course, we have one example, I guess, of one of our partner RSLs that recently secured planning permission on conversion of an empty shop unit in Hulton Road. I think strategically, Marcus would like us to consider, as part of that approach, opportunities going forward, not only retaining as far as possible a vibrant town centre, which obviously is important to the local authority, but equally where there are areas that could lend themselves to remodeling, then we should look to those. So yes, we are. Yes, we have had conversations about that. I think there are also examples in other local authorities where work of this nature has already been undertaken. I know Cardiff Council, for example, are putting in a number of bids under the temporary accommodation grant scheme, looking at some conversion of empty office space in Cardiff. And again, we're looking actively at existing accommodation as well. And as you know, we're looking at a potential site, a former guest house as well in Barry.
If I could add a further observation there, Chair, as well. I often find one of the benefits potentially of using office space, especially if it's in a town centre, is potentially its proximity to other amenities. I mean, one of the concerns that lots of people raise, particularly with proposed developments for social housing, is that it's a great development in itself, but its distance from shops, its access to public transport. I can think in my own ward, for example, I've had constituents in not council properties but housing association properties ask for assistance in finding them alternative accommodation in perhaps Penarth or Dinas Powys, simply because the services and facilities, especially if you don't have access to a car, aren't necessarily as good as people may want, and to satisfy people's needs. So potentially there is that added benefit if you're identifying or introducing new housing stock that is closer to those services as well.
I would agree, Councillor Carroll. The opportunities in our town centres, and particularly for when we think of things like cost of living, around our net zero carbon zero ambitions, being closer to facilities, relying on public transport rather than cars, etc. Town centres give a huge opportunity to deliver those agendas.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carroll. Over to Councillor Hanks.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Mike. Thank you for that report. I had a few queries. You've answered most of them. The one was like 4.1, 62% of respondents said it was difficult to get in touch with the right person. That was slightly concerning, and I think it would be nicer for us all to know that statistic would possibly go down. And the other query I had was, what level of Welsh Government support are we having now, and how confident are you that it'll continue next year?
Yeah, I think in terms of your first point, please bear in mind that the needs assessment work was pre the opening of the one-stop housing support shop on Houghton Road, and I would hope that there are many more people who access services that are now aware. I think part of the challenge for us is to advertise. If you recall, we chose not to. We chose to soft launch the Pobble scheme on Houghton Road, although we did have earlier this year. We did have a more formal opening, and as you can see, in terms of the actions, we do reflect upon that. So a single point of contact is something that is going to be really important to our clients. We know that our clients want. So the provision of single point of contact, perhaps provision of mobile telephone numbers and the like, rather than, and as we know, people tend not to like to go through a call centre approach in order to raise their issues and concerns. So again, we've got some initiatives there to improve that position. In terms of Welsh Government funding, local authorities are lobbying Welsh Government for funding post March next year. We reflect that, you know, the cost of bed and breakfast is 2.3 million. At the moment, we're utilising our homelessness reserve because not all of the funding is currently provided by Welsh Government. That was tapered. One of the hotels funding was reduced in September, and we've had to use our own homelessness reserve funding to continue to pay for that. So we are lobbying Welsh Government. Welsh Government are acutely aware of the housing crisis and the housing problems across Wales. Clearly, we've got issues in terms of provision of accommodation for our Ukrainian friends. We are seeing issues in relation to asylum and also our own resettlement picture in the Vale Glamorgan. However, I think it was alluded, Gemma did allude to that Welsh Government aren't necessarily expecting a significant investment from UK government, given the current economic climate, I guess. Although in speaking to some of the Welsh Government officials, clearly ministers are acutely aware of the issues and are looking to do whatever they can to assist us. What difference will that make? Well, if the tap is turned off in March, then there's a significant issue for the council. What we're trying to do at the moment is to move as many people into alternative forms of provision, but move on is a difficulty. As I mentioned earlier, single people, we don't have enough single persons accommodation. We're currently looking at options in terms of the new Renting Homes Act, which will allow us to consider use of 3-bedroom and larger council housing to convert that into some form of shared accommodation, bedsit type accommodation with shared services and facilities. There is a standard for move-on accommodation and temporary accommodation. Welsh Government have relaxed that standard given the crisis we have. They've temporarily relaxed that standard, so we can look at perhaps alternatives that we'd not considered previously as an option. We're also, as you may be, as I know you are aware, Councillor, we're also looking at provision of, and we've been successful in bidding for and indicating acceptance of funding for modular accommodation and on sites in the Vale as well, as an opportunity to increase the supply other than bed and breakfast. But you know, that is a huge challenge for us at the moment. I mentioned we have about 90 people, I think it is at the moment. Nick will correct me if I'm wrong, but about 90 people at the moment in bed and breakfast. And quite frankly, we've had about 90 people in bed and breakfast, it seems to me, for the last 6 months. And even though we've had schemes come forward where we have been able to move people out of bed and breakfast, equally people are coming back into service, or new applications are coming in to replace those that are moving out of the bed and breakfast position. So it is it's a very dire position at the moment, but we're doing everything we can, obviously, to improve that. But by the end of March, I think we will have some significant financial pressures with temporary accommodation going forward.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Councillor Hanks. And now move on to Councillor Buckley.
Good evening, Mike, and thank you, Chair. My question was to do with the modular housing. Is that the shipping containers, the converted shipping containers into like 1-bedroom flats? And
yeah, the option that we're looking at, Councillor Buckley, they're not shipping containers. They are purpose-built modular accommodation. We're currently doing some work with a company called Waits, who and with Cardiff Council. We're looking to work collaboratively with Cardiff Council. There are a number of modular housing providers in the UK, but also abroad. So what we're looking at are, unlike the units at Court Road, which were panelised systems, so they came as preformed panels and we put the contractor put them together on site. These will come on the back of the lorry and they will be moved on to site. The initial work that we're doing at the moment is appraising the groundwork, SAP approvals and the like. We have a number of sites in consideration, we're looking potentially at up to 100 units of modular accommodation. But as things stand, you know, it's unlikely that those units would be delivered until the start of the next financial year. There's about a 12-week lead-in time for orders to be placed and for those units to be ready. And we've also got some as I say, some initial issues in terms of site appraisal. What we'll be looking to do is to utilise the emergency provisions that were introduced during COVID. So in terms of accelerated procedures, looking at issues such as planning and procurement, which we relied on in terms of Court Road. But these are very much looking at meanwhile sites. So they are sites that are identified potentially for permanent housing in the future, but we have an emergency need to use now.
Thank you very much. Cheers, mate. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. You're welcome. And Mike, if I may, I have a question, and that is around the plans cycle is 4 years. What provision have you got in place for review and in terms of stakeholders input into that part of that review cycle?
Yeah, so it is a 4-year strategy, and as it mentions in the report, it's effectively bringing two sort of strategies or action plans together, both in terms of the support and also the homeless prevention. There's still a requirement clearly for us to provide mid-term reports, so there is a requirement to have a review every 2 years, which we'll be required to do and report through to Welsh Government. In terms of the stakeholder work, you can actually see it's one of the priority actions actually in the report around refining that stakeholder analysis and continuing to use, I suppose, mini questionnaires or mini contacts during the period of that 4 years to ensure that our stakeholder feedback remains relevant. But as I say, that I guess the main impact will be at the 2-year midpoint review. I failed to mention, in terms of the action plan itself, consistent with the existing strategies, we currently have an overarching housing forum that reviews the operational elements of the homelessness strategy and support plan. And as you can see within the body of the report, there is an indication there that Scrutiny may well have a role in terms of that more strategic oversight of the action plan, with perhaps a regular report, as we do now, a 6-monthly report coming back to Scrutiny Committee in order to gauge progress and to comment on work as we go forward. So perhaps that may be looking at the recommendations. You may wish to reinforce that recommendation, possibly back to Cabinet, asking for Scrutiny to have a 6-monthly report during the life of the strategy.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, that's I certainly believe that's important, and especially taking into consideration the pressures, the financial pressures that we've already sort of talked about and were highlighted by Gemma in previous reports. Do any other colleagues have any questions at this point? No. Mark, if we move to recommendations, I understand there's a couple of recommendations stemming from this document.
Right, so Chair, we obviously our first recommendation here is consideration of the themes and objectives in housing support programme strategy. So as whether there's anything specific there, or if committee happy to note that bit. We also have as well the recommendation about the committee endorsing the draft Housing Support Programme strategy for referral to Cabinet for approval and adoption as well. And
can I come in on that, Mark? Is it possible that we can take into consideration what Mike and I've just discussed? If we can have a sort of a commitment for that scrutiny, the document comes back to scrutiny for a 6-monthly sort of review.
Well, we can put that as a separate recommendation, okay, Chair, as well. Lovely. for a 6-monthly report to come back for scrutiny for their consideration and review. So we can have that as an additional recommendation as well as those 2 recommendations as well. So if committee are happy with those recommendations there, and then the additional one about a 6-monthly report to come back to scrutiny.
Committee members in agreement? Yep. Okay. I'll take those those nods as an affirmation. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, committee. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, so I'm going to move on now to the next item, which is the Value in the Vale volunteering scheme. And I believe that Nick Jones, alongside, I believe, Mike, you're going to lend support to this, to present in this report. Am I right?
Also
yes,
to note,
yes.
Leanne Young is here as well.
Oh, right,
Sorry,
okay,
Mike,
so
I
do apologise. Sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to say Nick will lead on the overview, but Leanne is the most important person, more important than myself and Nick in relation to this area of work. Leanne has worked.
There she is.
There she is. This is Leanne's baby, and all of the positive work around this, the majority of it is certainly down to Leanne and her colleagues who have contributed to this. So I'll hand you over to Nick, and then I'm sure Leanne will be able to give you a much more fuller flavour, really, in terms of what she's been doing for the last 12 months.
Thank you. So over to you, Nick, and then welcome, Leanne.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Thanks everyone for that. And Mike is absolutely right. Yeah, I think the real value here is probably some of the detail which Leanne's going to talk to us about a little bit later on. Essentially, this report is a progress report, really asking members to consider and note progress to date in implementing the Value in the Vale scheme. So as Mike said, it's going to be a bit of a double. I think I'm just going to set the scene a little bit, really, and give some of the background regarding to how we've got to this point, really, and some of you may have been aware of the time banking scheme which came before, so I'll talk a little bit about that just to sort of set the context, and Leanne hopefully will get into more of the nitty-gritty in terms of how the scheme works, and importantly as well highlighting some of the successes to date. So for those who don't know, haven't had awareness of this before, essentially Value in the Vale supports people with barriers to volunteering to be able to take up volunteering opportunities, to improve their confidence, build up their skills, reduce social isolation, loneliness, etc. Volunteers typically include vulnerable people, people furthest from employment perhaps, people who have experiencing poor mental health and poor health in general, and sometimes people who don't have sort of good support networks, family and friends living nearby. And council tenants as well make up a significant proportion of the volunteers. In terms of the background, as I mentioned, Value in the Vale grew out of the time banking scheme. That was run purely for the benefit of council tenants only, and operated in partnership with an organisation called Tempo. Tempo were, and still are, a social enterprise who developed this time banking concept where people were incentivised to volunteer and they could redeem their rewards then at a range of local and national outlets. Effectively what the council did, bought into the time banking scheme via Tempo and paid an annual subscription charge. So we had some input and we worked closely with Tempo, but it was very much their scheme. There were some really good benefits to the time banking scheme. Lots of people getting involved in volunteering, and the impact of that was extremely positive on the volunteers. Huge increases in their confidence, skill levels, etc. but there were some difficulties as well, notably that it was restricted to council tenants only, because the way the scheme was funded from the HRA, from the rent accounts, it was only for tenants, and also that the rewards were probably, if we're being truthful about this, weren't always relevant and weren't always local. So people found it difficult to redeem the rewards, or didn't value the rewards in a way that we would have liked them to. So the potential really to build and expand the project was identified by the Public Services Board initially, and subsequently Public Health Wales funding was secured to really sort of grow this model really, and specifically with a view to addressing inequality and improving public health outcomes. Specifically around sort of low-level mental health, anxiety, low mood, isolation, the sorts of things that people were suffering with a lot, and calling on the services of primary health care, going to the GP, etc. So volunteering is seen as a positive way to sort of address some of the core or the underlying themes behind some of the problems really. So subsequently, a project officer was recruited. Initially, it was another person, but more recently, Leanne's taken on board the role. And Leanne's worked with partners, really, a wide range of partners, to create a bespoke, a Vale-specific volunteering scheme, if you like. And the emphasis on that model was about two things. Firstly, about being local, so enabling local people to take up local opportunities nearby to where they live, and also to be able to redeem the vouchers and the rewards at local businesses and facilities. So that kind of has the added benefit of supporting local businesses and services as well. That local element was an important part. And the second emphasis was about digital. The scheme came about or developed during COVID, when face-to-face volunteering opportunities were very difficult. We weren't able to go out and meet people and take part in the way we would have traditionally have done so. So that sort of spurred us on to think about how this service could be delivered digitally. So enabling people to find volunteering opportunities online, to track their volunteering activity online, and to redeem vouchers online as well. So very much a digital element. So I'll probably pause there for a moment really, and pass you over to Leanne, maybe to share some more detail about how the Value in the Vale scheme operates, some of the local partners that we've been able to get on board, and probably as well to highlight some of the really impressive results already to date. So hopefully that's okay, Leanne, and you can sort of take over from there.
Of course. Thank you, Nick and Mike, for your introduction. As you mentioned, the last few months have been really hectic getting everything together, but now we've got a web page that's live and extremely exciting. It's exclusive to the Vale. I don't think anybody else at the moment locally is doing anything quite the same. It was realised that whilst there are many volunteering opportunities within the Vale, the way in which their volunteers could redeem rewards were nationwide. So, as Nick mentioned, many volunteers would be signposted to Tempo to redeem their rewards. They were called time credits then. Tempo are great. They offer some really fantastic rewards. However, if you want to go on a boat trip down the Thames, that's not really practical if you live in the Vale. There are a few businesses on board within the Vale offering really good rewards, but there was the opportunity to grow that and make something quite special. So Value in the Vale encompasses many elements of volunteering under one roof, so to speak. The web page has a section for volunteers. Volunteers may currently be volunteering, but use their part of the web page to create their account and track rewards. We've used the word rewards instead of time credits. So for every hour a volunteer gives, they get one reward. That then goes into their accounts that they can redeem each month through the partners that are on board also. Sometimes people come to the webpage, they're not currently volunteering, so then they can visit the organisations tab. That gives them plenty of local opportunities to volunteer within organisations in the Vale. Many people that are volunteering at the moment are volunteering for very different reasons. Some are bereaved, they need to get out and just socialise to try and deal with that. Others are retired, some are socially isolated with low self-esteem.
there are a group of people who are struggling with obesity, so getting out, volunteering, keeping them fit and active is really important. Some are furthest removed from the job market, and we've got other groups of people on board, such as Vale Plus. They work with adults within the community with learning disabilities. They do some fantastic work. So with all these volunteers on board, it's really important to make sure that the rewards you're offering are relevant. Not everybody wants rewarding, and that's absolutely fine. Nobody's forced to take rewards. However, some people will take a reward to gift back. So, for example, we have Morrison's on board giving the opportunity of 2 rewards, one of which is a coffee and cake, or to help people make healthier food choices, they can have a piece of fruit instead of cake. They're also offering toiletry bags, so that's a shower gel, shampoo, conditioner, toothpaste, deodorant. Now, the reason behind that is if they want to gift that back, they can put that in the food bank within Morrison's. So they're not taking the reward for themselves, they're volunteering and then giving back again by gifting the rewards back to the food bank. There are some fantastic stories around volunteering and what it's done for people on the webpage and the volunteers tab. If you scroll to the bottom, you'll see Kim's story. It's a really holistic journey. Kim was considered furthest removed from the job market. She's, like I say, come on a fantastic journey to the point now she's almost ready for work. Her CV's looking fantastic. Her confidence is, well, it's probably more than mine at the moment. So within the webpage, we are going to be sharing lots of stories, people's journeys, how volunteering has had a really positive impact on their life. The other reason people can redeem rewards as well is that we've looked at social isolation, as I've mentioned. When people redeem their rewards, they may go out for a coffee. That's getting them out and about. That's getting them socialising with friends. Sometimes people are a little bit embarrassed to say, well, look, I can't afford a coffee. But if they know they've got a free one, well, let's go here and have a coffee, shall we? We're also looking at warm spaces. Some people, as we all know, were struggling to heat their own homes. So by going out and about volunteering in the first place, sometimes they're giving themselves the opportunity to attend a warm space, but as well as that, in redeeming their rewards, maybe go in for a coffee, using that as an example again, they're again attending a warm space. We talked a little bit earlier about obesity. Some of the rewards on offer are very active, so people can partake in our archery sessions. There's a 8-seater pedal bike down Barry Island offered by Black Tab. That's a great reward for people to take, but that can be used by groups of people such as Vale Plus as well. Those people redeeming that reward together, as I think they like to. There's a lot of businesses. When I spoke with the partners that are currently on board, I talked a lot about the cost of living crisis, and I think it's also important to remember that businesses are struggling with that equally. But I really don't think there's been anybody who said no. Everybody's been keen to come on board. What's in it for businesses? It is giving something back, but also there's the hope that that's going to increase footfall through their door. So if somebody's come in to redeem their coffee, they may bring a friend, they may buy a piece of cake. They also get free advertising through the webpage, which is linked to the social media. So everybody's been really positive about this. I also spoke a little earlier about people on a back to work journey. We are offering free accredited training for volunteers. It can be because they're on that back to work journey, or they may just like to attend the training. The training covers things such as safeguarding, GDPR, customer service and confidence building. All of these things I think are not only relevant in returning to work, but offering an organisation that they may be volunteering for as well. To date, the courses have been extremely popular. We're running our second group of courses next week, and again they're fully booked, so that's really positive. There's been some really positive links with some of the partners and the organisations on board. Vale Plus have linked quite well now with South Wales Aviation Museum, so I think we're on phase 2 of Value in the Vale and how that's looking now. In my head, we're at phase 8 because the project has so much scope to grow, to expand, to offer so much to people. We've got social media, which I spoke about just a few minutes ago. Our Facebook page at the moment, I spoke with the web designer today, and we've got 5,200 page reaches. So that means that's the total number of people who've actually seen the posts that we've put out there. I guess everything about Value in the Vale at the moment is just really positive. Everybody's embracing it, not only the volunteers, the partners, the organisations, but also the people coming to attend the courses. People are asking, can we do another course? What else can we do? We've got other course providers now wanting to deliver courses as well. I'll stop there because I'm aware I've not stopped for air. So I could talk all night, but if anybody has any questions.
Okay, thank you, Leanne. And honestly, I think we'd all be in agreement that we would listen to you talk all night because your enthusiasm is infectious, and it certainly sort of, enthused me. So I know I have some questions, but I will not be selfish, and I will bring in Councillor Buckley first.
Good evening. Not so much a question. I'd like to thank you for all the work that you're doing on that, because I've worked with the time bank and stuff in my previous employment at Ely, and I've seen the difference it made to people who were classed as unemployable before they started volunteering. And they had the success rates on not either them finding employment or going into further education was in excess of 80%. So you should give yourself a massive pat on the back just for that. But as the mental health champion for the Vale, any non-chemical intervention which helps people with their feeling good about themselves, as you said, it's not all about the rewards. Some of it's altruistic. And I've asked the one GP surgery in Penarth for people, not so much with complex PTSD and that, but anxiety and problems on the lower end of the scale. I'd rather people be offered volunteering as opposed to medical interventions for all the things that you so passionately said about. People are exercising without having to go to the gym. They're not realising it's fresh air is company. And I just think everything you're doing there is spot on, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Buckley. Leanne, did you want to come in, or Nick, did you want to come in on that, or shall I move on to Councillor Morgan, who has his hands raised?
I think Councillor Buckley raised it perfectly there. I should have written down what he just said, I think, because it sort of encapsulates everything that's really good about the scheme. So thanks for that.
Okay, so I'll now bring in Councillor Morgan.
Yeah, really just echoing what Councillor Buckley's just said. It's not a question, it's just to commend this wonderful scheme. I've just had a sneaky look at the website there, and I think this is something that we want to commend Leanne and Nick for the work that's gone into it. And I could continue listening to Leanne because I think it's very inspirational, and I think we spread the word about this. This is so good for the value of people's lives, for the value of our community, and it's for once, it's not about money and cost of living and all that kind of stuff. It's just showing how we can all help and support one another without major expense, just doing the right thing in a community. So let's spread the word. That's all I would say.
Thank you, Councillor Morgan. There's a fantastic sentiment. I now bring in over another hand, and Councillor Hennessy.
Yeah, I would like to praise you as well. As a person who used to volunteer, working group, and then became a councillor, I can't commend all the work you're doing. I just found your webpage and followed it.
Fantastic.
So it's a brilliant page, and I'd like to thank you for all the hard work you're doing.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hennessy. If I may just ask a quick question. You referenced social sort of isolation, Leanne, and I just wanted to talk about, ask a question about rural isolation, because living out sort of in the Western Vale, I know that it's sometimes stereotyped as being more affluent and people not having those complex or challenging needs. What sort of uptake has there been in terms of the, you know, your reach out to the Western Vale, or is this part of steps 5, 6, 7 and 8 of your cunning plan?
Well, like you, I also live in the rural Western Vale, and I at times have also struggled with public transport, with getting involved with certain things that, you know, maybe my car's broken down, so I've experienced that myself. I have targeted quite a lot of the rural Vale. Part of my role is digital engagement within our sheltered schemes. So we have Longmeadow in Cowbridge, we have Lantwick Major, to name two. We've been quite successful in getting volunteers to attend these sheltered schemes. They are delivering digital drop-in sessions, but as well as that, they're a little bit like me. Their enthusiasm has just gone from, you know, from 1 to 5. They originally came in to deliver informal digital training, whether that be helping somebody create an email address or order a prescription online. But now they're asking me, can we do a coffee morning? Can we make pumpkin soup? So I've managed now to link with the local Rotarians who are really on board with getting involved with our sheltered schemes as well. So the rural Vale is quite important to me as well. And I think not only getting people involved, but also trying to help them in overcoming their barriers to attending, whether it be a volunteering place or somewhere to redeem their rewards. I think Green Links are fantastic. Kim, whose story is on the webpage, does volunteer near Fonmont Castle. At the time, Kim didn't drive, she does now, which is another fantastic success for her. And she was struggling with transport. We managed to get some funding initially, but then when I introduced her to Green Links, that worked really well for her as well. So
thank you, that's really good to hear. And I, wearing my other hat, I'm like Councillor Buckley, I'm one of the council's champions for older people.
okay.
So I'll certainly be contacting you separate to this with regards to sort of linking them to the sort of those that underrepresented group. Thank you, Leanne.
Thanks.
I don't have any other hands at this point. So Mark, again, can I sort of rely on you to take us through the recommendations?
Yep, sorry, Chair, can you bear with me?
It's okay. I think I've got the document if you...
No, I
you're
just
okay?
saw a bit of a lag then in the camera and the microphone. Apologies for that. Yeah, so we've got 2 recommendations off the back of this report. First one is for the committee to consider the priority themes and objectives to be included in the housing support programme strategy. So that's, you know, if there's anything that needs to be added, or if the committee is simply happy to note that. And then also that the committee endorsed the draft housing support strategy for referral to Cabinet for approval and adoption as well.
So,
Mark, I think they may be the recommendations on the previous report.
Oh no,
the
apologies. Sorry, apologies.
It's okay.
Nick. Yeah, you're quite right. Apologies for that. A bit of a lag in my reports as well.
No, it's my fault for throwing this at you. Sorry.
No, it's fine. So valuing the Vale volunteering scheme. Sorry, there's only one recommendation for this, so that is the committee considers and notes the report, highlighting the progress to date in terms of implementing the Vale, valuing the Vale volunteering scheme. So unless the committee have any other comments or recommendations they want to add, then it'd just be a matter of just sort of noting the report.
Okay. So are there any additional comments that colleagues want to put forward at this stage, or all happy to note the report? Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so I believe, Mark, that we don't have any urgent business. I've certainly not been notified of any, and there's nothing under part 2.
No, that's right, Chair. There's nothing under those items for part 1 and part 2.
So that leaves me to notify colleagues and attendees of the next meeting, which I believe is the 7th of December, or have I got that wrong?
No, that should be fine, Chair. That's
Yep.
yeah, Wednesday, the 7th of December. That's our current date.
Okay, fantastic. Well, in that case, thank you all very much for your patience, stepping in. Sort of hope that everyone who's given absences because they're not unwell get well soon, and I look forward to seeing everyone in December. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.